Thank you for coming. I don't have a formal paper, but I'm going to offer a few thoughts on the subject of dialogue among civilizations. I understand that there's some sensitivity here, and I'm not sure that I understand exactly what the sensitivities are about talking about dialogue among religions. But in some ways, that's really what we're talking about here. Religions and civilizations are closely linked. Often civilizations are religiously defined. You could say that even increasingly secular Europe is in a sense defined by its religion or its lack of religion now. It's a specific part of the culture that makes it what it is. Now, how is this whole question of dialogue between religions, between different cultures and so on, connected with the conference theme of sustainability, which is really more of an economic theme than what I will be talking about? Sustainable development is the term that's being used in the title of the conference. Well, I would suggest a few things that might be said about this. First of all, the opposite of dialogue between civilizations often seems to be tension, if not war, between civilizations. It's much easier to demonize people with whom we do not speak, people with whom we do not talk, people that we don't make any effort to understand. And so the question would be, I suppose, connected with sustainable development, how many billions or even trillions of dollars or euros have been wasted on armaments and consumed by wars? How many productive and creative lives have been snuffed out in those sorts of conflicts that could have been avoided in many cases had people been able to talk, to discuss, to understand one another? What inventions and works of literature have been lost in situations like the Holocaust and the Gulag and World War I? It's common to observe in British literature the loss of the great poets, many of them who died in the trenches in World War I in what was essentially a completely pointless war that achieved nothing except to set the stage for World War II. In terms of economics as well, to look at it just in terms of dollars and cents, investors need stability. They need predictability to be able to know what to do with their funds, to be willing to take a risk to invest capital. Instability, wars, being on the brink of wars, and so on, reduces that stability, decreases the predictability that might be there otherwise, and makes it very difficult to make economic plans. In many nations, in many regions of the earth right now, and for many decades, probably throughout human history, stability and predictability have been threatened, if not non-existent. And even if they're threatened, that's reason for an investor not to invest. Think of I think one specific case, the inefficiencies that occur because of the Arab-Israeli conflict, the inefficiencies in terms of allocation of human capital, the inability of labor to get together with entrepreneurs, the inability of capital to find laborers, the blockage of transportation of goods that occurs in that situation. Simply trying to get across the border between two nations that are more or less at peace, Israel and Jordan, is a major effort. And that kind of thing destroys trade. It makes it impossible for the region to flourish as it might otherwise flourish if the tensions could be reduced. In fact, as an illustration of this, at night, from the eastern part of Jerusalem, the Arab side of the city, but up on the Mount of Olives that overlooks the city and forms Jerusalem's eastern boundary, it's possible at night to see the glow of the lights of the city of Amman. Okay, they're that close together. Amman to Jerusalem is just about 69 kilometers, about 43 miles. For comparison, Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is only about 10 miles, or about 15 kilometers shorter. So they're very close together, and yet they're a world apart. It's very difficult to get from one to the other. It's almost impossible to do serious trade across that boundary, which is otherwise just a little river called the Jordan, hardly a ditch with just a little bit of water in it. It's not an important barrier. It's the political barrier. It's the ideological barrier that forbids human flourishing, or makes human flourishing more difficult in an environment like this. I think in these terms, or in this context of a famous quote from Hans Küng, the German-Swiss Jesuit Catholic theologian, in a book called Christianity, Essence, History, and Future, he writes this, which has become kind of a slogan. No peace among the nations without peace among the religions. No peace among the religions without dialogue between the religions. And then he concludes with something I think is a little more questionable. No dialogue between the religions without investigation of the foundation of the religions. But I think that initial principle, the first two propositions, are self-evidently true, that there can be no peace among the nations without peace among the religions, and there can be no peace among the religions without dialogue between the religions. Surely we're more aware of this right now than perhaps at any time in recent memory. I've heard mention of the secularization thesis here a few times, that very confident Western sociologists and students of history were convinced, because many of them are non-religious, that religion was disappearing as a factor in human affairs. I think we can now safely say that that's ridiculously false. We know that's not true, that religion has reemerged in many areas as a crucial factor. It always was. If you're yourself in a secular mode, you may not see what's going on outside there. The famous remark made by Stalin when someone advised him that a certain policy of his would come in contact with the Vatican, would cause opposition in Rome. He said, well, how many divisions has the Pope? And the answer to that, I think, is now clear. When John Paul II went to Poland, it was the beginning of the end of the Soviet bloc. So in the end, the Vatican had more divisions than the Kremlin had. And so the Kremlin is history and the Vatican is still here. Religion is a fundamental force undergirding much in history. As I say, the alternative to speaking with one another is often, realistically speaking, to demonize one another. And I want to tell a story. This is related to my own religious tradition. The story is told of Christa Stendahl. Christa Stendahl was recently passed away. Christa Stendahl was the dean of Harvard Divinity School, a very eminent scholar of the New Testament, and also for a time the Lutheran bishop of Stockholm, Sweden, which is where he was from. And the story is told that there was a time when a building was about to be built outside of Stockholm, a Mormon temple. And they sometimes draw controversy, somewhat like in the West, a mosque draws controversy. When it's built in certain areas, people get nervous right now because they're scared. They don't know what is going to be going on in this mosque. The same thing with this Stockholm temple. There was opposition. And the people who opposed it at one point came to Christa Stendahl and asked, well, what is the position of the Lutheran Church of Sweden on the construction of this building? Well, he said, what he did is he called a press conference, and he said, I will meet with you and meet with the press in a building adjacent to another Mormon building, adjacent to the site where the temple was being built. That almost right there indicated which way he was going to go. The fact that he was going to hold his press conference in a Mormon building, all right? What he did was to lay out 3 rules for dealing with other religious traditions, and I would say with other traditions altogether. And the rules are interesting. The first one is, if you're going to learn about another religious tradition, for example, go first to those who love it, not to its enemies. You can always talk to the enemies afterwards, but first learn from those who love that religion, that tradition, what it is that makes them love it, what it is they find of value in it, okay? The second principle that he laid down was, always compare your best to their best. Never compare your best to their worst. Okay? Now you'd think this would be obvious. The first one ought to be obvious too, but it's often ignored. The idea is you don't say, for example, if you're a Christian, well, we have Mother Teresa of Calcutta and you have Osama bin Laden. That's not fair. Christianity has saints, so does Islam. Christianity has villains, so does Islam. If you want to look at villains on both sides. But then the third principle that he laid down is, I think, the most interesting of all of them. He said, always leave room for what he called holy envy. Now, what did he mean by holy envy? He said, you should always look at another tradition and try to find in it something that you can learn from, something that tradition does extremely well. You don't need necessarily to convert, but you should be able to find something there where you think, I admire that. That is good. They do that well, and I could incorporate that into my life in some way. So, for example, I would say that, I don't need to give examples, I suppose. I have a lot of other things to say. I think I'll drop that. But I want to go ahead and say something else. There's some other principles that you could adopt here. One is a principle that goes back allegedly to St. Francis of Assisi, where he said you should first seek to understand and then to be understood. So try to understand the other first and then to be understood yourself. In other words, we should be good listeners to another tradition, to find out what it is about this tradition that speaks to people. And I want to go even further. I want to say a word against the idea of tolerance. That may be unfashionable here, but I don't like the word tolerance very much. To me, I don't know what the connotation will be in Turkish, but in English the word tolerance almost has the sense of, well, okay, I will allow you to exist. I'll hold my nose. I don't value anything about you, but I'll permit you to exist because I should. I want something more than that. I like the idea of looking at the other tradition and trying to say, what can I learn from them? What do they have to teach me? Okay? So there are many things that we can learn from a tradition that isn't our own. It's one of the reasons why the teaching of history is so important. One of the experiences I have at my university, which is a very devoutly Christian university, is teaching Islamic philosophy. And I've taught on many occasions Al-Ghazali, and sometimes I've taught Al-Ghazali's Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers, in connection with Ibn Rushd's Tahafut, okay, the incoherence of the incoherence, famous debate. I think when things are going best in those classes is when I have students who they've come to take the class because they want to study some old dead Muslim guy, right? You know, long time ago. It's just a matter of historical interest. Very soon they forget that he died centuries ago. They forget that he spoke a different language, that he was from a very foreign culture, and they find him just an interesting person to have a conversation with. They're arguing with him, learning from him, and the distances are forgotten. This is a kind of unself-conscious interfaith dialogue. You discover this guy is actually not so different from me, and many of the issues he raises are important to me and can help me understand my own issues. Another point drawn from a person who had a great deal of influence on me, the late Marshall Hodgson, one of the great students of Islam in the West, made a point about valuing what other people have to teach. He said, you know, no movement lasts for a long time unless it speaks to people in some way. There might be small movements that are just crazy. They appeal to a few lunatics and then they disappear. But if a movement, religious or otherwise, has lasted for a long time and has attracted a substantial number of followers, there must be something in it that speaks to people. And you don't understand it until you get that. You don't have to agree, but you have to see how an intelligent person could, and a good person could accept this. If you come away saying, only an idiot could believe that, well, if people have been believing it for 1,000 years or 1,500 years or longer, and demonstrably they're not all idiots, then you've missed something. The problem is yours, not theirs. So I think it's really important that we learn to understand one another. I realize my time is just about out, so I want to close with something. I'll skip some other things I wanted to say. I want to quote from Surah Al-Ma'idah in the Quran. This is, I'll do it in English, but this I think is a wonderful principle. We have given a law, this is God speaking in the Quran. We have given a law and a way of life to each of you. Had God wanted, He could have made you into one nation. But He wanted to see who are the more pious ones among you. Compete with each other in righteousness. All of you will return to God, who will tell you the truth in the matter of your differences. Okay? Now that is tremendously important, I think. That sometimes we act as if God just made a mistake and we need to fix it for Him. We need to eliminate these other people, change them. But God could have made us all one. He didn't, precisely so that we could learn from one another. That is a teaching of Islam. That's a teaching, I think, that speaks to the human experience. And I'll just close with that, saying that interreligious dialogue is extremely important, but it shouldn't be seen only as a way to peace.